Okay.
Yes, we're ready.
Well, we're here with Steve Zahn, and this is Doug Boyd, and we're going to do an oral history interview for the Louie B. Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky Libraries. This interview is really being done as part of the From Combat to Kentucky project, which up until this point, and probably from this point on, contains interviews with veterans who have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. In particular, we want to talk to you about the fact that you are a big supporter of veterans, and so we want to talk about also your career. So why don't we start off and keep it open-ended, and talk, if you would, begin by telling us a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in Minnesota. I was just a regular kind of small town suburban kid. I was going to, actually, as a kid I always wanted to be in the military, and I opted for the theater, the obvious next choice. And I started acting. I was at Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota. I dropped out after a year, after I'd been, cast in the leads there, and I thought, man, I don't want to sit here that long. I went home. I started working professionally in Minneapolis. I then auditioned to schools out east. I got into the American Repertory Theater Institute for Advanced Theatrical Training at Harvard. I was there for 2 years, a little more. Moved to New York, did theater for years, and then started doing film in like '93. Reality Bites was my first film, and I don't know how many I've done since then, maybe 50 or so, but now it's 2013 and I'm still doing it.
You're also here in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So talk about that transition.
I lived in the city, and then my wife and I met in '90 on a Broadway tour of Bye Bye Birdie with Tommy Tune and Ann Reinking. And we were on the road for 13 months. We met, lived in an apartment, bought a cabin in Pennsylvania as like our weekend place. But then we realized that we couldn't pay for both. And so we had to move to our cabin. And so we were always outside the city our whole existence. And then we bought a farm after we made some money. And so we were out there for a long time. But she grew up here, so I always tried to convince her to move back home, which she never wanted to do until we had kids. And then she bit, and I dived on it. And we've been here since, it'd be 8 years, July 4th.
So there are a couple, folks who come to mind who fit that sort of celebrity category who've come back to Kentucky or come to Kentucky. What do you like about it? I mean, what is it that's the draw?
Well, I think that for me, it was the history. I mean, it's beautiful. Like every state has, aspects of it that are beautiful. But I really enjoyed coming here and spending time and being in a place that was just so kind of entrenched in this kind of old American history. I just thought it was, and to this day, I mean, I'm constantly reading Kentucky history and trying to find those places I'm the guy that stops on the side of the road and drives my family crazy reading the historical markers, Oh, we got to read the other side. Pull up. What does it say? And, my kids are doing it, I brainwashed them into, but that was, and then our family, obviously, her side, how much easier it would be to raise kids here. And Lexington being, actually, West Central New Jersey is a lot more rural than Central Kentucky, which a lot of people think is kind of interesting. Why Kentucky? I'm like, are you kidding? You drive an hour outside New York and it's back ass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
right. So as we talk a little bit about, I think, your career, I think more in depth, because actually before we do that, let's talk about Minnesota a bit. Just I'm curious because you did mention interest in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about what that meant as a kid.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, and my dad always thought it was interesting. He was a Lutheran minister, and I grew up in universities. And I remember as a young kid, having college kids that were Vietnam vets at the house, and I was always kind of interested in that. And now I think of it, and these guys were like, in their early 20s, going back to school, and they were combat vets, and they were in our house, and I was always kind of interested in that mysterious, kind of hoping they would tell me something, which they never did. And then we took a family trip. I think this is a common, it was out east to DC, and we went to Gettysburg for 3 days or 2 days, and I was just blown away on a different level, I think, than most people. I was just completely hypnotized by the place, and that was it. I mean, I remember going to the record store once. I saved up my allowance, and my dad bought a record, and I bought a record, and he bought this Jesus Christ Superstar, and I bought the soundtrack to Patton. We were in line, and he just laughed, going, "That's my son. He's getting Patton." That's what I know every note to that soundtrack. But I was always, I was the kid who, when we got HBO and there were 5 movies on a month and Bridge Too Far was on, I saw it 37 times in 1 month, And when I played Battle of the Bulge outside in the winter, it wasn't going pow pow, it was digging a trench and sitting in the cold. And then a neighbor's car would come down the cul-de-sac, and it was a Panzer, And I envisioned what it would be like being that cold and hearing that come over the hill. And that, for me, it was an emotional connection, which is interesting that my life went into acting and pretending. I thought I wanted to be a soldier, an officer, something that I didn't. I had a different mission,
So looking back now, I mean, it's easy to sort of draw those lines and make those connections now, but at some point as a young man, you have to decide what you want to do and how, what you're going to do and go down a path. And you chose, acting. Did you ever consider military as
Oh,
an
yeah.
option?
That was, through high school, I wanted to be in the Marines. And the Marine Corps were at my door all the time. My mom drove my mom crazy. They came to every football game I played. Oh my gosh! And my buddy, a friend of mine, was going in definitely, and I was kind of going to go in with them, and I didn't, and he did. He could still be there. I don't even know, but I was totally gonna. I remember one Memorial Day as a kid. I had this book, Letters from Vietnam or something. There was this letter in it that was beautiful, this moving letter about this guy's experience. And I made copies of it. I forgot about this. I made copies of it, like 100 copies. And I went down to Harriet Lake down in Minneapolis, and I handed them out. And I remember people going like, "What is this, religious?" And I was like, "No, just read it." I was in high school. And I remember giving one to a vet, and I knew he was a vet because he had, the hat on or what. I don't know. I just knew that he was a vet, and I didn't want to give him one. I thought, "Wow, this is." But then I thought twice. I went back and gave him it, and then he ran after me. And he was like, "Thank you for this. I'm in this group, and we can use this, and this is a great story." And I think that always stuck with me, kind of, Like there are ways to help vets. You don't know how you know what I mean? You have to kind of discover that way to help people. And maybe it's just acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Having some knowledge of it maybe that's enough.
Showing appreciation.
Showing appreciation, true appreciation, not a bumper sticker. Active appreciation. Go find somebody. Give some money to some organization. Find somebody who needs help. I mean, that's support.
Definitely. And
Well,
let's get to the veteran thing, I think, but and talk about that. But let's walk through a little bit more in specific, a little bit more specifically your career. You are now an extremely successful actor, and talk about being that young man and sort of making that emotional decision. It's interesting because, a parent, now that I'm a parent and thinking about it, you actually made the call to sort of pursue acting as opposed to going to the military. It's few parents that might actually be relieved that a child is deciding to become an actor as opposed to...
Mine really, they knew it.
They knew it.
It was very interesting.
Talk about that moment and in your life.
I was at college, and I remember taking a trip to London for this thing over winter break, and I saw this theater, and I remember sitting there going, I can do this. I can do this with these people. Not better, but I can be a part of. I know I can be a part of this, and I can give something, and I can work. And I came back, and I just decided I'm going to drop out, and I called my dad. And I was like, hey, I'm dropping out. And my dad's reaction was, oh, are you coming back? Are you going to come home now? Like, it wasn't like, he knew. They knew I was going to leave. They knew what I was going to do. And so it wasn't a shock to them. And I was good at I was good at acting in high school. I was the kid that everybody said, oh my gosh. But I think to them, they knew that I had some different emotional, it wasn't just, I wasn't the kid that stood up on the coffee table at Thanksgiving and tap danced. It was a different kind of artistic thing. But anyway, I just dropped out. They were like, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to pursue acting.
So what'd you do?
I moved home, and my mentor, a high school teacher, thank God, this guy was incredible. Like, he could have directed New York, and he was a high school teacher. So lucky. Anyway.
What was his name?
Frank Plute. Amazing. And Ertwin Jones Hermiting, my football coach, who was an improv. It got me into improv. And he was like, you have to go audition. Go, well, it's professional. Just go lie. Go. So I crashed an audition, the first one I went to, and I got it. And I was working in a machine shop, a tool and die place. And I remember the day I quit my job at the tool and die place going, I got to play, I'm going to be an actor. And they were like, oh, what? Okay. Sally. What?
They probably still talk about that.
Yeah, no, they're like, yeah, I used to work right there. I almost lost a finger, whatever. So it was a good move, but it was, but it was all very gradual for me. Mm-hmm. And then I met people that were like, you have something, you should go study. You should really concentrate on it and go to a good school. And I was like, what's that? Where are those places? And I was given like 3, from these actors that were from New York that were in the show. And they said, oh, this is good. And I got into one. I was so excited. I went there. I was so dumb. I didn't know. I was the most naive student they've ever had at the American Repertory Theater. I just know. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anybody's name. I didn't know what rank they had. I put my foot in my mouth constantly because that didn't matter, and actually it helped me because if somebody told me, like everybody else in my class had finished undergraduate, so I was young by 3 years, but then it's kind of a big deal, 4 years. At that age, it's a big deal, 4 years, but I didn't question anything, They'd have a director come in and do a main stage show at the American Repertory Theater, and they would use students. They could use them in the show, which saved theater money, and it helped everybody. And I was cast all the time. And it was because I didn't question anything. They were like, run through that wall. And all my classmates would go like, I'm not going to do that. I'd already be through. And maybe that's why I live on a farm. I'm still trying to keep that kind of naivete at the top because it's really kind of helped me. The more you know about something, the more you question it, and you get apprehensive, and
So you made the leap from stage to screen.
Mm-hmm.
What's that like?
It was very interesting. I was very nervous about it. And Reality Bites was I went directly from a play, Sophistry, that I was in the play with Ethan Hawke, and he was in the movie. And Ben Stiller came to see the play, and then they were like, "You should audition." I think Ethan said, "You should audition Steve for one of the parts." And I went through the process and the callbacks and everything, and I got the part. And I went there, and I remember when we rehearsed, I was like, learn my stuff, and I went in, and it was just a different deal. It was more talking, and no one was prepared like I was, and it was like, oh, okay, this is. But the hitting marks and everything, it was more the technical thing that I was afraid of. The acting thing is the same, whether you're with 800 people or 3 people. It's the truth, Well, it's different because there's an audience. Yeah, well, no crap. Yeah, there's 800 people, so you got to be a little louder. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you're not as truthful. Mm-hmm. So to me, it didn't matter. And we teach here in Lexington, my wife and I, acting classes, and we always tell them that. Don't let anybody tell you it's that much different. It's not. Just be honest, But it was fun. I really enjoyed movies, and one of the reasons was it was like, I was in movies, like the things that I as a kid, like A Bridge Too Far, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is great. And for me, it was getting excited about a genre, like a war flick. And every agent I had, my manager, I've been with her from day one. And if you called her right now and said, if you were looking for one thing for Steve to do and work really hard for him to get in the door or get a part, what would it be? She'd go, a military picture. And it's because of that 10-year-old sitting watching Bridge Too Far.
So you've done a couple films. What was the first war film? What was the first?
See, I was always the guy, the farm kid who deer hunted and fished and lived in the woods, and the military interest, and I played the drug addicts in the city. The cool urban guys. I didn't understand it. I was the surfer guy. I mean, completely opposite of my character and who I am. I was, the guy that should be in the military. I was up for Courage Under Fire. It was between me and Matt Damon, Ed Zwick directing, and I didn't get it. And that day I didn't get it, I got That Thing You Do, which is interesting. Completely different character, completely different way. Now, if I would have got Courage Under Fire, it might have changed the perspective because people, kind of look at that first thing you do, or, And so I kind of became the comedic guy, which is great, and I love that. But it never fulfilled that kind of, I did Crimson Tide, and I was very excited to get that. And it was a tiny part, but it was awesome to be in that movie.
Did you feel that at that time? Were you aware at that time of this sort of like, I'm being typecast into these things, I'm going to go with it because I need to be, to establish...
Sure, I was ecstatic about it. I mean, you get to the point of where you're kind of being typecast, or you hear that they're auditioning people for this thing, and they're asking for a Steve Zahn type. That's when you're like, oh, wow, that's great. When you're too old for it or whatever. But, yeah, you're aware of it, but it never bothered me because I knew that I had the chops or whatever. I would get the opportunity later on, and people would be like, oh, I had no clue that you could do that. And you're like, yeah, I know. It must be really hard to do something serious. Like, yes. I mean, I spent 6 years as an ingenue in theater. That's all I did. But I go, yeah, it's really hard. And so I was excited mostly when I got Rescue Dawn. I went after that like crazy. About true story about Dieter Dengler and his another pilot, Dwayne Whitney Martin, who was shot down and held captive in Laos early in the war, and it was the only escape actually that I think where somebody escaped and survived, Dieter Dengler. And my character dies in it, but I had to get that movie. I did everything I could to get that movie.
Talk about that sort of, because this is different in the sense that it's a true story.
Mm-hmm.
You're passionate about history, you're passionate about the military. What's that process like? Specifically in a military context.
You mean the movie?
Getting into the movie that is based on this historical.
It was easy. I was so excited. I had to lose 40 pounds, and it was easy because I was so into it. When I started doing interviews like this for the movie after, like how much research did you do? And I remember the first person to ask me that, and I said, my whole life. I researched this stuff since I was 10 years old. I didn't have to buy any books. I didn't have to talk to any vets. I knew how to act this. I just knew because I have this odd connection to it.
So you have other actors clearly weren't in that same scenario on the set.
Right. Well, everybody works different or whatever.
Works different. Did you, does a film like that actively, it probably depends on the director, but do they actively try to bring in sort of methods for establishing sort of a military context?
Oh, sure. Most of them have well, I know that Hanks and those guys, when they did, I was offered Band of Brothers and the Pacific, and I didn't do them. That's another, Band of Brothers is a huge regret. I did Joyride instead, but it was a big movie, it was a big payday. It was kind of a big move to move into a different level, and I had to do it business-wise. And to this day, it's hard for me to sit down and even glimpse that Band of Brothers. That's hard, because that would have fulfilled a lot, and I didn't do it. And then when they did Private Ryan, I was on a private plane with Tom doing press for that thing you do, flying over France, and he was telling me, hey, we're doing, and I was reading, I think, the Ambrose book then. I was like, dude, I'll be anything. I'll be a dead German. I don't care. I didn't get in that, and that just drives me crazy to this day. Mm-hmm. To this day.
But it does.
I've lost other gigs. I don't even remember. I could care less. Great. Rockwell got it? Awesome. But that, man, it kills me.
So in the films that
but when they prep for that, like Dale Dye is a big guy that they used, and they do boot camps for like a week, where they go out and Dale take them out and they do the real deal. I mean, they go camp and they ambush them, they wake them up in the middle of the night with, explosions and crazy stuff. What we did was just it was more. Werner Herzog, who directed Rescue Dawn, is amazing, and it was very bare bones. We were in the middle of the jungle, and we were barefoot the whole time, and lost 40 pounds. I mean, you're there, and there's not a lot of extraneous stuff to distract you. He keeps it pretty raw, and so when we were in the prison, we were chained together, all of us, in blocks, and there were times when they would change. Turn around and it would take an hour or whatever. We would just lay in them. He wouldn't take us out. And it would just cut into you and everything, but it was it was just kind of a way to stay in it,
Absolutely. That's cool.
Because the minute you get off set, then somebody's bored and wants to talk about how they love soft pretzels, and you're like, yeah, it's awesome, dude. So, I have to pretend this thing. I really don't want to talk about soft pretzels or whatever.
Have you been through that boot camp, though, that sort of...
No.
Interesting experience.
It would be. We've done some crazy... I did the boot camp. Me and my 3 friends went on a canoe trip. We would go canoeing in northern Minnesota every summer. My folks would let us go for 5 days. 18. And do a river. And we would go MREs, and we thought, oh, we're going to do it real. And we just kicked ourselves for doing that once. So we brought, this is horrible. We should have brought some manwich, something. Dinty Moore. So I did the boot camp on my own, I guess. I don't know. But I would love to do that. I really would.
So you have this amazing sort of story about, I think, I like the idea of connecting it to the playing pretend as a child in the military. The story about the letter, the Vietnam, letter, and that's interesting.
That was interesting. But another thing, when I was a small boy, when I was like 8, 9, in Mankato, Minnesota, World at War would come on Sunday nights. It was like 10 o'clock, I think. And I would have to go to bed at like 8:30. My dad would get me out of bed, and I would sit on his lap, or we'd sit together and we would watch World at War. He was baffled how I could sit and watch that documentary hosted by Laurence Olivier, and it was pretty bare bone, just kind of guys talking about their experience and footage. But it wasn't, and he was just like, wow, you really dig this. And I would watch, I remember every World at War, I've seen them so many times, and I was just completely into it on a completely different level. For some reason, in elementary school, we would check out books, and I would check out these big World War II picture books. To this day, if you brought in a World War II photograph book of the photographs that were published, before of late, I could tell you, oh, that's Leningrad, that's Guadalcanal, that's Iwo Jima, because all I would read was the captions, and my teachers were like, you might want to encourage him to get out Curious George or whatever. There's so many things that now that I think about it, I really haven't thought about this, but what is that? It's very strange, isn't it?
It is.
Very interesting kind of connection.
But that moment of making copies of this letter that you found moving and handing it out and having this sort of...
Yeah, on my own, like no prompting from my mom saying, it'd be nice. It wasn't that. I, on my own, thought, what are we doing today? What does this day mean? Is it Johnsonville brats? And that's fine. That's great, And
I wonder, you mentioned having Vietnam vets around the house, at times,
Maybe that was...
talked about it, but I wonder...
I was always, people like that. They were, to this day, it's very exciting for me to meet someone that was like, oh, you were on Hill 881 South? You were on Omaha Beach? I'm completely, those guys at the World War II Museum, those guys in the lobby, oh, I love talking to those dudes. Where were you? And in that place, in that venue, they talk. They'll tell you anything. So neat.
It is.
And
I want to get back to the World War II Museum, so I'm going to make a mental note to do that, because I want to talk about that with your New Orleans connection. But at some point, you've reached a level of fame. You've got a certain level of street cred and such, and you are an advocate for veterans' issues, and because of this personal interest, clearly. But talk about making that transition to suddenly realizing you can do something for this community now.
Yeah, it's a really, other than like just what everybody else does when they get into something, supporting something, like whether it be money or writing Congress, I'm a big, member of the IAVA, which is a great organization that prompts you to, contact your representatives and get on them about issues with vets, which are vast right now. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed that aren't, which is unbelievable. But the special thing that I could give was, it's weird. I don't really, when I go around in my day, I don't think of myself as a celebrity. I'm an actor. That's my job. I truly don't, when somebody runs up to me, my instinct is like, something on fire, or, why are you running? It's not like, it's because I'm in movies. That's not and I think people think that you think that way, and I really don't. So the point of this is, I didn't feel like when I was asked to go on a trip overseas to Iraq, my instinct was to say no. As much as I wanted to go, Steve, I felt, well, what can I give? I don't want to go there and what? I'm just assuming people know who I am. I don't have an act. I'm not a stand-up comedian. I don't have a show. I would feel like an asshole. And they kept saying, no, you don't get it. Just going means the world. Just you being an American going, I was like, look, I want to go, trust me. This would be a dream come true to go into a combat zone, something I envisioned myself doing my whole life and had to abandon, and now I can do it. They were like, just go, trust me. And I trusted them. I said, okay, what am I going to be doing? I needed to know the specifics about what I was going to do. Like what am I get up, will you just hang out? No. What am I going to do? They're like, okay, they get in line, and then they started going, okay, and you're going to have free time, and you're going to, we're going to go. I said, okay, cool. We're going to sign autographs. And I went with these like swimsuit models. It was like 4 girls who were great. I ended up carrying all their luggage everywhere from Blackhawks. Anyway, should I get into this now?
Let's talk about this. Let's go back. So you've been invited.
So that was my. In doing it, I realized this special thing that I could give, which really made me happy. More so than just what I do as an individual. Because I'm not the kind of person that's going to, I make fun of, the celebrities who, are the spokesperson for the thing. And I get approached with things like, I know you're interested in this, can you get, and I'm like, no, because it doesn't, I want to do something. Like if I'm going to give, I'm going to give anonymously. I'm just going to give. That's how I was raised. You give. That's the point for you, not for other people to know. And so I would feel weird being like the guy who's for the Dolphins. I was the Dolphin guy. Which is valid and cool. I don't. Not to say that person who does that is not doing the right thing, but just for me it would be weird. So this was a way of fulfilling that and not having to be, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. My perception of that is from the history of entertainers going over and singing and doing a concert or something for the troops.
Well, that was my idea. Like the USO goes and in World War II, and it's Bob Hope, and he brings the people, and they do like a tap number, and then, and it's a structured thing. And I was like, whoa, why am I there?
So you mentioned before that this wasn't USO.
Right.
Let's get back to that. So who's doing the asking? And let's go through the details. I want to know what it's like to, get on a plane and be headed for combat zone.
Man. Well, I was asked through, it was called MVP Sports. They're out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. They do promotional stuff for companies. They do they're real connected with obviously sports. So they bring in conventions. They'll bring in famous whatever. They also have a part of their company that does military tours. It's the same thing as the USO. Same kind of trip. They'll bring bands. They'll bring sport guys. A lot of sports people, cheerleaders, like the whole, Minnesota Viking cheerleading, 10 girls will go and they'll do like a show and they sign autographs. And I was connected, I was asked to go, and I said yes. I mean, it was over the 4th of July. And I told my wife, and she was like, no. And yeah, it's going to be great. But she knew what it meant to me, so she was like, yeah, you should do that. So I said yes, and they needed my passport 2 months ahead of time, and I went through this whole deal. I mean, I don't know what they do, but I had to get cleared by a lot of people. And yeah, I remember packing for it. It was like, how do you pack for this? You know, I just had like hiking stuff, and you know, don't bring any military clothes or anything like that. You know, I was like, yeah, of course. And I mean, I packed my stuff, and I got on a plane, and I flew to, I think, Paris, and then I met everybody in somewhere, I think in Germany. I went to London and I can't remember, or straight to Germany. And I walked into a room, and I didn't even know who I was supposed to meet. And our guide was there. It was awesome. And the girls, and then you get on a plane and you fly to Kuwait. And on that plane, on that leg, it's a little different. Because you see a lot of shaved heads, and there's a different vibe on there. You know what I mean? There's like, okay, there's government people, and there's military people, and there's Kuwaitis, and there's business people, and it's just a totally different flight. And then in Kuwait, you get off that plane, and you're in that airport, and you step out in that heat, and it's the middle of the night, and you think how weird and how easy it is to go from there to here. Far out. And now I'm in a combat zone. I was on a plane for, I mean, isn't that crazy? That's what's weird about it. And then you get into the combat zone, and you're like, this incredibly different world that is so, because of modern transportation and technology, it's so close, and yet it's so foreign and weird and in every way. It was a lot to take in, but it kept you busy. And then in Kuwait, we went to a base right away. And we spent like one day going to bases in Kuwait. And then we walked out on we stayed in these barracks, and very little sleep. And I just had a duffel, big backpack, and I was light, and getting briefed about what we can take pictures of and what not, and it was very loose. It was very strange. And then we got on Blackhawks. I remember in the morning we were waiting for them to come in. You always waited for them. They didn't wait for you. It was a different deal. And these came in, and the guys came out, and they gave us kind of the safety, which was like, if we go down, you get away from the chopper. We're going to meet at the back of the chopper. There's weapons. It was just crazy, like, okay, this is more than just, this is how you buckle your seatbelt, and, can you run the emergency? It was different, everything was different. We got on the Blackhawks and took off, and loud, low. I remember just looking out and seeing camels and just desert, and the other Blackhawk with the other half of our crew, and just being floored, and then them coming over and saying, like, we're in Iraq. Like, wow.
Did you have a moment on that flight, just thinking back again from what we've talked about, where you realized this wasn't pretend?
Yes, totally. I mean, it was really, this is a real deal. I think we all did. We were all very chatty and jokey, and then we got there, and we were like, what do we do? Go around it was, I think that was it, when we were briefed about the helicopters. That's when we all kind of realized, okay, where are we going? Camp Bucca, okay. And we flew in, and we circled this base in the middle of nowhere, and Camp Bucca housed all of the detainees at the time, like one of the biggest prison, I think. And we landed there, and then we were off. And we got our place to stay, and we had two guys each person had like two liaisons and they were kind of your guides, and I was just full of questions, and I didn't want to sleep. I remember going to the cafeteria. I was blown away by nice it was and how many variety of food. I thought it was just chow, Man, it was incredible. You could get stir fry or get sandwich. I'm in the mood for some pasta, It was crazy. And I didn't want to sleep. And my guys were great. I remember at Camp Bucca, they were awesome. I just said, let's go talk to guys. Let's go just walk around. Let's go to the armory. Can we go? And I kind of had the run of the place. It was great being a guest like that.
What were things that you were asking about? What were some of those questions that are just like?
Oh, just like when are your shifts? What do you do? What, how hot does it get? How hot is it in your thing? What have you ever passed out? When's the last time we had mortar incoming? Because there were places to hide constantly everywhere. It's just constant. What about the prison? If they ever broke out, is there a riot? What happens when there's a riot? I was constantly, and then it was. And then I started going into, we did a signing right away. It was our once I did the first signing, I realized how I was relieved that it didn't matter that I had a show. Didn't matter that I had an act or a guitar. It was just taking pictures with these dudes. And you got genuine people with just genuine thanks. And you could tell. They were like, man, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'm like, dude, really? Busy schedule? Hey, anything. I'll get naked for your picture, man. I started doing all these crazy pictures, whatever. I would get real short so they could be tall. I'm just being funny, And then there's this line of like 300 guys, and then you, of course, would have to do it for everyone, And I would. And I would be exhausted after, But I didn't care. If I go to the grocery shopping today at Kroger, I'm going to have somebody ask me for a photograph, and it's going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to be like, I'm shopping. All right. Sure. Those guys, I would have stayed up all night taking pictures with them. Didn't matter. And not one of them was, and I had a fear that people would go like, no, who are the weirdos here? None of them were like that. So welcoming and so...
Have you, awkward question, but, I know you probably don't Google yourself, but...
I did this morning.
But those photos are online.
Oh, yeah.
And, you can take a look at some of those photos, whether it's on Flickr or one of these photos.
Yeah, probably.
And see what these, people are saying about this image, these images. That
I've never thought of that. Like,
it's
I bet you they're
actually really cool, I think, because you can tell by looking at those images that this is a real proud moment for them, and you just being there is instilling something in them that really...
But also then being active while you're there, not just sitting back going, I'm the guy. And I would stay up all night and I'd go in. They're watching a movie and I'd go in and we'd sit. It was so fun to walk into a group of guys. I was like, this movie sucks. Why are you watching this? And I would go up and look for one of mine. Watch this. Like, oh, dude. Oh my God, that was such a rush for me to go wake up someone in a bunk and have them be pissed off and going wake up, it's your time on, you have to do the guarding. Kidding, go back to sleep. I would do stuff like that, all right? I wanted to shoot a 50 cal and they were like, you have to talk to the CEO. I'm like, where is he? I want to talk to him right now. And they let me go in. I was like, look. It's very important that I shoot a 50 caliber while I'm in Iraq, and you could be the one person to make my dreams come true. And I'd humor them. They were like, all right, look, you can go out. They'll, every morning at 2 o'clock, they're going to, shoot over the wire. I got to do that. I remember that night, it was 1, 2 in the morning. We're like, there's a 10K tomorrow. It's 4th of July. The 4th of July, 10K or 6K. I forget what it was, a 4-mile run. I run a lot. I'm running. I didn't have running shoes. I had hiking boots. They were like, it's at 5 o'clock because it's so damn hot here. You got to get up. And I'm doing it. 3 hours? Let's do it. I went to bed for 3 hours. They woke me up. I don't think in my life I've ever been that like jazzed. I'm out there, ran the thing.
We can't let this go though. You fired 50.
I fired 50 off a Humvee,
Okay, so we're gonna
240 out of a tower. I shot out of a helicopter,
Wow.
a saw.
All right.
I took the course. It was amazing. For me, are you kidding? With all this preface, I was so, yeah, it was great. I remember saying like, which way? They're like, over the wire. Like, okay, what if somebody's out there? We're like, shouldn't be there. Like tracers, boom, 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 boom. And then they had a 4th of July kind of take the course kind of, because I remember going in and shooting. All the girls, everybody was shooting like an M4 and which wasn't new to me. So it was like, you know. And then we're like, oh, we'll shoot the saw. And we're all like, I have videos of all these girls like shooting the saw, like, you know, like it was just so fun. And then I took the course. There was like a timed thing, and you get, you know, with the M4, and I had like beat these guys that were there, and they were like, I think the guy that was running it was like, I'm gonna put your picture up, you know, with your score, and if you get lower than an actor, it'll be like. That's all. Anyway, it was fun, and then they had Friday night fights. I remember 4th of July in Camp Bucca. Never had a better 4th. Tell you what, wow, that was something. Mm-hmm. And they had these fights, Friday night fights, and it was just like anybody could fight anybody in a boxing ring, and it was just thug city fighting. People were worn out in 1 minute, like, yeah. And it was crazy. And there were all these Brits there, and they wanted me to say something. I remember talking about the Brits, and I was like, wow. I think we could be friends with the Iraqi people. I mean, look, the Brits are here. It took a while, but I remember saying, it's good you guys finally got some camo. The red thing didn't work, so it was just so fun. And then I decided in a heartbeat, I was like, hey, I need to go fight. I need to fight somebody. And the camp guys were like, yeah, it'd be great if you did. So I found this officer, this woman. I was like, yeah, I hear you kill people like with your bare hands. And she's like, yeah, I'm pretty good with that. I said, well, do you want to fight? I said, don't hold back, don't break my neck, but don't like pull the punches, and I'm gonna fight you. And so is this dumb telling these specific stupid stories? So she goes, okay, great. And I get the headgear on and everything. And I told my guys, who are like my buddies now, I said, get like 15 waters, and we're gonna line them up on the ring. And then I'm gonna go out, I had this whole thing, I'm gonna go out and stretch in front of her, and like do push-ups, like psych her out. And then when she starts punching me, I'm gonna say time out, and then I'm gonna come to the ring, and then I'm gonna have a big red man chew in when I'm fighting, and I want you to like take my lip and take it out. And then you come in, and the other guy put a big one in, stuffed it in, and then was like, all right, go. It was great. It was so impromptu and fun, man. Camp Bucca was cool. And then just talking to those guys, man, I mean, I can't tell, your heart would break. I mean, hearing these stories, these guys who were like, we would end up talking about our kids, like we were just talking before we rolled. And soccer and baseball and this and that, and going, when's the last time you saw your kids, man? Like, and they're thanking you for coming over for 10 days, and you're like, dude, are you kidding? Thanking me? What? And you've been on your 3rd deployment? Oh man, it's crazy. Crazy. And I still am in touch with a lot of those guys, like just dudes I met a while ago. And we're back now, and I'm like, I think, man, what a crazy time. You know? 3rd deployment, National Guardsman with like, it was crazy.
It is. It's incredible. And just, I think,
And they were great. And they were funny and smart. And I was really blown away by, I didn't meet a bunch of redneck dummies. I met a lot of bright, motivated, interesting people who were really fun to hang out with and got it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we're humorous, a lot of humor. You know, I was pleasantly surprised. And
You gonna go back?
oh yeah, even if it's, you know, to, you know, base somewhere, you know, I'd like to go to a hospital. But then again, that's a different thing too. I mean, but, man, going to little fobs in the middle of nowhere.
What are those like?
That was great. Those guys are so happy, these Marines out at camp. It was called Korean Village. And we were taking Ospreys, like the Marines were flying. It was fun to fly in those. And we went to this fob, I remember, out on the Syrian border. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. I can't remember the name of it right now. It was small. It must have been, I don't know, maybe 300 Marines, 200 Marines out there. They were so happy because they had no, you know, they weren't in a big base where there was chain of command and a lot of just kind of distractions. They were Marines, and they were in this little crappy place. And they had like, they were so proud of it. And they were so excited we were there. They had little kiddie pools out. It was so hot, and they were in the kiddie pools. Like, you know, there were no rules there, you know, but you know that they were on it. They were like good at what they did. I remember the girls were like, where do you have to go to the bathroom? And there was like literally like a 3-door latrine, and then next to it, it just said poo box. And then the urinal was like a water bottle bigger than this, you know, the bigger ones, that was turned upside down, cut open with a pipe taped onto a pipe into the ground. That was it. You just looked out at, you know, I can see 77 miles, you know. Let me throw the smoke grenade. That was a big deal.
How many of those did you do? Like, you know, you're in Bucca for how many days?
We were there for like 2 days. Most places we'd stay overnight at a place and do a big thing, but Rasani, we were at Al-Assad, Liberty, Korean Village, Bucca, bunch of fobs. I can't remember the names of them. There were numbers, you know. But we would move a lot during the day. I mean, there were times when we would go to like 3 bases a day, you know. And Bucca was the best because we got like an entire day overnight and then left later in the day the next day. That was the only time that we had a little more time. Other than that, it was like run and gun. And I remember these guys were it's like, hey man, it's my buddy's, it's his birthday, and they made steaks for him. And they're having like a luau, or, you know, they're playing volleyball or something. And it was a smaller base. We were just going over there and wishing him happy birthday. It was just so fun. All those little things, all the little stories. This is what I remember. I can't remember the names of bases, but I remember all the conversations and the little things, you know.
Do you ever have a moment where you're kind of afraid? You're in a combat zone?
There was one time on a helicopter, we were all packed in. We were trying to get back to Liberty, I think, in the green zone, because there was a sandstorm coming. And we all piled onto this bunch of press people. I don't even know who they were, but we were packed into this Black Hawk, and they shut the doors. It was so hot. Oh my God. I mean, and we would fly to low altitude real fast. And the first time I remember sitting by the window, and it just, I saw something just shoot by, and I thought, that was a terror. I looked, and I looked at everybody else, and the guy in front of me, and they were like, I thought, okay, well, they're not freaking out. You didn't see that, right? You couldn't talk because it was so loud. And I found out later, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, they deploy when they go over heat, and it, you know, it shoots out these things. You could go over a fire, you know, I guess, as long as the helicopter detects heat, it sends out those. Anyway, And I remember the last night I heard incoming rounds in Baghdad, and we were so tired. We were bunking with, there was some guy from CNN or I don't know who talked too much. I remember, and we were at the end of this trip. We were so tired. I mean, I honestly got like 3-4 hours a night. I really didn't sleep. I was just dead. And he just kept talking. We just fell asleep, and then this SAS, I think, Brit, like special forces guys came in, and I was so tired. They had headlamps on, and I remember opening my eyes and all these kind of headlamps going, and he was like looking at me and looking up at the bunk, and they were trying to find a place to sleep, but they were trying to be nice, and I remember yelling at them. The guy, and he was asleep. I'm like, dude, you're the guy who's, what? Turn on the light, man. I was so tired, like, just turn on the light. And he turns on the light. I didn't even know the guns they had. They were like, and they were so sorry, but they had these, machine guns. And oh, sorry. So we're just looking for a place to sleep. I'm like, yeah, we'll find one. And with the gun. I don't even know if they recognized me. We all looked at each other. I'm like, just do it. And then they turn off the light, and I remember hearing rounds, and then I had a little flashlight, and it shined on. Hey, what's going on? I was like, that's incoming, right? He's like, yeah. Whatever. What are you gonna do? That was the kind of the deal. Like, all right. If it gets close, we'll do something. They woke up in the morning and all these SAS guys are just laying everywhere, like just passed out. They were so tired. Those guys were beat. We were making noise, pulling suitcases over them, and just slept. And that was the night we went into the palace, Saddam Hussein's palace.
What was that like?
Oh, it was huge, and if it was my contractor, I would have been like, "You kidding?" A bunch of builders had to have been killed building this place because it was so gaudy. All the marble. And there's two the grand staircase that splits, and there's one step more on this side. For real. Like crazy. Like, wow. Like, look at that molding. Nail that in. I just used glue? Wow. So it looks incredible, but it really was just kind of ridiculous, It looked like the set of Dallas. Like the set, not the real place.
We had an interview come in. We did an interview with a gentleman who was, for this project, that was in a combat support role.
Uh-huh.
And it was different for us because we were interviewing all these stories with people who had combat experience. And it was really amazing because at one point it sort of came out that he was in charge of the mail. And he actually took, was sending the mail and making sure that these things were going to the right places. And he took an incredible amount of pride in that. And that was a moment for me when we were watching back on that
Makes sense.
Had a moment where really just sort of became super aware of the fact that morale matters.
Yeah.
And
that was his job to keep that up.
He took
I'm proud of that.
He took a ton of pride in that.
That makes total sense.
And that's really what your role in this
What a great story.
is. What a great story.
What a
That's
great
right.
movie. You know what I mean? Like, I hear that and I go, wow, that would be interesting.
It's a great interview. It's one of my favorite interviews for this project. But I think, your role over here really is about boosting and helping.
Yeah, just making them laugh.
morale.
Making people laugh. That was my mission. And I got there, I was like, I know how to make these people laugh, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do some crazy stuff. And there were times I remember, like, hey, we're eating in the back room. They were still conscious of, like, we don't want you to constantly be barraged with these guys. I was like, no, that's why I'm here. I'm going to sit. And there was one of our guides, they were all military, he's like, hey, those guys see at that table, it was a big cap, he said, those guys just came in. They had it tough. I think they lost some people. I was like, oh. They were like, you should go have dinner with them. So I got my tray, and I remember sitting over there. And I sat down with these guys who were all dirty, and they were tired, and they could give a shit that I was with them. And it was the only time that I really felt like I have to do a little extra here in order to. And I'm glad I was prepped. They told me, and I sat down and I you mind if I said, I could tell right away. We just talked a little bit, and then they asked me something, and I asked them, and this and that, and then they started joking around, and then it got a little lighter, and then, I was, whatever, the little things of like eating his tater tots, replacing it with my broccoli, just going, yeah, I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Just stuff like that. And then they got out of their head, and then I started talking about home, and talking about my son, and this and that, and then we went outside, and these guys were busy in this, with the, whatever, and I went outside, and I hung with them for like an hour and a half, and they showed me their vehicles, and they showed me their stuff, and they were telling me that they lost 2 guys, an IED, like 2 days before, and they just got in, they were in, and it was really powerful. And then I started talking about my son and how, he's just gonna, all these stories, man, he was like, how old is he? I forget, he was like 8, 9, I think Henry was 13. He was like 9, And he ran off, and he grabbed this knife, this amazing folding knife. I looked online, it's like, $500 knife or $400, but those guys get it for that. And he signed it PFC, and 2 Henry. And then on the other side of the blade, he put keep the peace, and that was it. And to this day, Henry's like, he's like, I told him the story. So these guys were real deal. And going through some crap, and I was able to make them feel better. That's it. That's kind of awesome.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, again, back to.
I'll never forget that trip. Even the little details. There's whole movies I've shot that I've forgotten everything. I'll never forget that trip.
How long were you there?
Like, I think 10 days. Taking the C-130 out with a bunch of troops. The girl next to me, she just sat there. It was real quiet. It was very weird. They told us, sometimes you go out with coffins and stuff. I mean, it's not like we have a reserved flight. You just get on what you can get on. We got on, and she sat there, and I just knew that I wasn't chit-chat, jokey time. So just sat there listening in my headphones like everybody else, and I remember. For the longest time on the tarmac, and it was really, really hot. And then we started moving. We taxied, and just as we were just taking off, she started to weep. It's like, kind of blown away. I took a picture, not of her weeping, but at one point I did turn my camera. It's one of my favorite pictures, and I just took this shot. These guys are sitting there, and she's cried. I just thought, I wonder why. Guys that were really sad about, and they wanted to tell me about the Iraqi guy that worked at the PX that they loved, and he was killed in a mortar attack. They told me a lot about him. It was very interesting. Yeah, you would love this guy, man. There was a very real connection with those people too. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, and just having, and now the beauty of that trip is now when I run into a vet, I have a doorway. It's not, I don't understand it. I would be the first to know that. But I have a glimpse, and I have a connection. Even if it's slight, it's enough to like, we have a new guy that mows our property and this company, and there's a new foreman. He came and he had a tattoo, and I saw it was Arabic, and I was like, what does that mean? He was like, born again, and I was like, oh, wow, that's great. He's like, I was in Marines and this and that. It turns out we're in that same little base where they had to blow up pools, and I have this connection with him, and every time he comes, I'm always like, we talk, and I'm like, hey, and I showed him pictures. I'm like, yeah, man, you had the Chesty Puller sign, that picture of Chesty Puller on the bathroom. He's like, yes, oh. So I have this, which fulfills my childhood thing too. I get an extra story. I get to befriend a real soldier, a real, it's not just my mom's uncle or the guys that came from the college and eat dinner at her house. It's a friend. And now I worked on Treme down in New Orleans, and there were two guys that were in Generation Kill, which is a great show about the Marines in Iraq. And the two advisors who were in the show one was a character Jeff was a character in the show, Treme, and Eric would come visit because he was Jeff's friend. I became really good friends with them. I remember meeting Eric at a crazy bar in New Orleans, and he was very kind of quiet and everything, and we were just talking, very, very funny guy, and I was like, so where'd you come from? He was like, whatever. Like, I was like, no, where were you 2 days ago? Where were you? Last week at this time, where were you? Because I knew he was serving. I took out his phone, he took a picture. It's like a full beard with the thing and the AK, and like, okay. That was a week ago. He's like, yeah, re-entry is hard, he said. I said, well, yeah, no kidding. Why don't you try Dayton, Ohio, not New Orleans, which is the extreme opposite of what you just went through. You're in the wrong place, man. It's like, this is crazy here, and that's crazy. But I have this connection to him, you know what I mean? And it's
no longer pretend.
It's no longer pretend.
You have this real...
And Jeff, they both deal with, the things that vets deal with when they come back psychologically, and I'm able to talk to them about that and try to help them and just befriend them. And through them, I write my congressman. I have a name that I can put on a letter now. It says, my friends, need to get their disability checks. We need to, we need to do that. We need to stop saying we support troops. Or at least we need to stop supporting them when they're clean and their butts and shine. We need to support them when they're dirty and broken. But we don't do that. We have a tendency in this country to kind of, it's fun when they go off and we have the parade,
The Nunn Center has been doing interviews since 1973, and one of the great collection strengths has been veterans. We have, really well over 500, closing in probably 600-700 now with veterans. World War II, got a couple from World War I, Korea, Vietnam.
Wow.
And sort of go through that. The majority is World War II. But the Vietnam project, which is relatively small compared to the World War II project, was all about that transition.
Uh-huh.
It was in the 80s, and it's frustrating to watch them, and see, knowing now, I think working with the veterans on this project, which is really about transition back, and transition into higher education. It's tough to watch those Vietnam interviews because they had no support base, and they're, for the most part, those interviews are very angry, and you feel the isolation coming through in those interviews, and I think once again, it comes back to this idea that morale really does matter, feeling appreciated, and so
it's huge.
Talk about sort of, you're saying, supporting vets and things like that. Talk a little bit about, I think, from your perspective, what you think you want to do, I think, to sort of maintain that tradition. You talk about going back, I think, to Afghanistan or Iraq.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to go on more trips, even if it's to a base that have to be in a combat zone or whatever. I think that's what I can do, that's special, I think just this recording, keeping for history. I mean, it's in this, not a documentary that's edited on the military channel. That's great too, but that's also a show that needs viewers. It needs to have something else in it. It's real, but it's also edited, and there's one sentence, and there's not the long pause. There's not all that other stuff. And I sometimes watch those documentaries and go, man, how much more stuff do they have that would be just as interesting, but because it's a half-hour show, and they have to have the graph, whatever. World at War, I was much more interested in hearing someone sit and talk, and that's what they did in that. And that's what you're doing here, and that's what's so important. And it's really important of the venue, and to get that true story. That's not. I mean, I should interview you. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get that true? How the hell does Bill Moyers do? How is he so great at not talking and yet having people give him just incredible stories that they didn't even tell their kids? How do you do that? You know what I mean? That's an art, and that's the kind of things that's how to preserve it. You know what I mean? So I'm reading all these books on Little Bighorn for some reason, and then I just got totally into it, and then it turned into like, not even about the battle, but how we remember the battle and where the information came from, and oral history from the Indians, and who wrote down who interviewed the Indians and when. It was 10 years later, and what did that battle mean to our country at the time? And then, well, of course they're going to say this because it's incredible how just because it's written down doesn't mean it's valid. Just because it's spoken to in front of a camera doesn't mean it's real. Doesn't mean it's not filtered in some way, And the guy from the Smithsonian Institute that went around with the old reel-to-reel and got the old banjo, Roscoe Holmes and stuff in Eastern Kentucky. Like, thank God that guy did that, and got it on their porch. And every once in a while, you hear a truck go by.
That's right, Alan Lomax.
Alan Lomax, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's it is so important. And I told you this story before, and I'm going to tell you again because I think it's appropriate. But 2 months ago, we get a reference request, like we get them all the time for our collections. Now the internet, we get requests from all over the world. This one came in from Italy, and it's a novelist writing a novel set in this small town in Italy. And he writes this, he writes to us that, he didn't come. We have an interview with a gentleman, 4-hour interview with a veteran who fought in the battle in this small town. He wants to listen to it, presumably to help him with his novel, but as it turns out, he wasn't randomly Googling oral history in this small town and World War II. He wanted this particular individual because this particular individual carved his name in the wall in an alleyway in this small town. And we are now able to triangulate a carving in a wall to a moment online in where he begins to, and he went so far as to read a poem on tape of his experience in the Battle of Tremonsuole, because he had written over 80 poems during World War II.
Wow.
And it really is remarkable now, I think, the ability, and we do, in documenting these stories, are able to sort of document them, but it's not just sitting on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
It really is actually turning into something that,
right.
that is
that's incredible. Little tiny things. It's the little things like that.
Yeah.
That tell the story.
The veterans that
move us.
Yeah.
That make us. Those are the things.
the ones we're interviewing now, I've gotten several notes to this effect, and we've re-interviewed some of them just to sort of find out how are we doing. Is this good to do, and is this
Right.
working? We've gotten I've gotten a couple letters, from mothers who said we never would have heard this story.
See?
The veterans themselves coming back to us saying, thank you so much. I literally can send my mother a link.
Right, and go like, I don't need to sit down and edit this, and I don't have to be there. That's far out.
It is. It's one of the things I didn't expect.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, what a service you're doing to that person that doesn't want to talk about it, and yet feels that it's important that the people they love know what happened to them. That's so interesting. That's where social media is amazing and great, and there's so many things about it that just stink. But I think there's things like that make it worth it and great, and that's when it's really fun. Wow.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh yeah, no. I hope again, in the same way that I felt weird about going over, because I didn't have an act, Now I'm on a database with a bunch of people that do the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretend.
You can downplay
I put on makeup.
You can downplay that all you want, but what you did was very real, and I think.
Well, it changed my life, and what appreciation I had for them before was just after that was just it's just took it over the edge, and I'm going to do it again. And I approached veterans differently now. I walk up to them, proud of what I did. I'm very proud of it, and I let them know, like, oh, it was, I took a trip over there, and immediately it's just a different. It's like me with when somebody just comes up and goes, "What's the movie you're in?" I ignore it, or the person that goes like, "Boom!" It's that has something specific. They turn and we have a conversation, and it's great. It's really wonderful. I love that. I was in the same street, whatever.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right.